Then I went from 1996 to 1997. That's right. I finally did it. I have played and completed my very first Final Fantasy video game ever by playing Final Fantasy VII Remake for the PlayStation 4. I have a strange relationship with this game, this series, or this specific one, because when the original one came out for the PlayStation in 1997, I was pretty young. I was playing mature games, but I had never played an RPG, at least to that extent. And so for me at the time, the mechanics were a bit over my head. I couldn't really grasp them. I played the demo for the original one. It came with a fighting game that I had called Tobal #1. And so I played the demo. I don't remember if I enjoyed the demo or not, but I was still excited for the release of it because there was so much hype around that game. But my brother was the one who was super into it. He was obsessed before it even came out. He was already obsessing over buying this game. I still remember it's very strange because in the end, I didn't actually end up playing the game. I played through. I played up until you meet Aerith or Eris in the original one, and I can barely even remember doing that, but I just remember not really enjoying it. I don't think I could understand the story. I think the story was a bit too much for me, and I think I didn't understand the materia and all that kind of stuff, the system, so I kind of just stopped playing it altogether. But I have a strange relationship with it because I have a very strong emotional connection to the game through its soundtrack. Even though I never played the game, I loved the soundtrack. And I don't even know how I remember getting into it because I didn't play the game. So I don't know how I would have heard the music to become a fan of it. But I loved the opening theme. And I think that maybe is how I got into it. But my brother even got me years later for my birthday the 4-disc set soundtrack. It's all MIDI music. And it's just stuck with me. I love the music so much, and because of that, it's caused me to follow the story. So I actually know the storyline of Final Fantasy VII for the most part. I don't know all the nuances and the details, but I know the main story beats. And I never went back to play it. And it was one of those games where I told myself that if I ever got the opportunity to play it again, that I really should, because it's such a seminal video game in the gaming industry's history. Regardless of whether you think it's one of the better Final Fantasies, a lot of Final Fantasy diehards don't think the 7 is even that great. They think 6 or even 4, I think, or some other ones are better. But it's there's no denying it's an extremely iconic, important game in the industry. But I by the time years just went by, it was 1997, years went by, and they did re-release it for other consoles, but I just, at that point, the graphics were just so old. I'm not one to be able to get back into that kind of style, and hardcore traditional Japanese RPGs, I just kind of outgrew them. I never really played too many of them. I think I could probably name you all of the JRPGs that I really have played. Skies of Arcadia Legends Skies of Arcadia for the Dreamcast, and then I played it again on the GameCube. Grandia 2 for the Dreamcast, Tales of Symphonia for the GameCube, and there's a couple others in there. There's maybe like 4 or 5 other ones. Star Ocean I love, Legend of Legaia I love. A few of them on the PlayStation, but mostly as I got older. But after a while, I just kind of got tired of the turn-based combat or even just anything like that. They're always so long. I don't have time anymore to put in like 80 hours into a game. But when they finally announced the remake for the PlayStation 4, I thought this is my time. This is a sign. This is my chance to finally experience this game so I can say I've played it. And it's episodic, so it's not the entire game. And so I was like, okay, this is cool. It won't be as long, hopefully. And it isn't. It's only about 30 hours long if you just kind of do the main quest. And even that, I almost let that slip through my fingers because I played the demo for the remake, and I accidentally put it on the classic setting. There's easy, hard, and classic for the demo, and I think the classic really turned me off. It wasn't as fun, and I played through the whole demo, and I was like, I don't like this at all. Like, well, not at all. It just didn't do anything for me, at least at the time. But then around Christmas, it went down 50% off. It was such a crazy deal. It's a brand new, essentially a brand new game. And so I was like, I really can't say no to this at this point. And I wasn't really even looking forward to playing it. And I expected me to start it and for it to take me months, like 3 months at least, to finish, because it is an RPG. And I was expecting not to really, like, I would have to force myself through it and not really like it, and I probably won't even finish it. But man, I was wrong. I had the exact opposite feeling. But it was also kind of similar to Cyberpunk in a way. If you listen to my Cyberpunk review, there are some similarities to my experience. My roller coaster ride with this game is a little bit similar to that. It starts off on such a high, and a lot of that has to do, like, even I get choked up, literally, like I could almost cry just from hearing that the little song I just played in this podcast. There's certain musical beats that really hit home to me, even though I'm not a fan. Like, even though I'm not a real fan who has played the game, I still have so much. I don't know how, but I have so much tied to this game. And they, a couple weeks ago, or not weeks ago, I think it was the last episode, I talked about Shenmue. And the reason Shenmue failed, apart from the game being boring, is just that they didn't treat the game with respect. They didn't treat the game's music and the fandom and what makes it special with enough respect and with enough restraint, or even implementing it, all the properties that make it a good game. I'm really butchering the sentence. I really should go back and just redo it, but I'm not going to. They don't treat the game with enough, like, they're just not tactical with it, whereas Final Fantasy VII Remake is the complete opposite, almost to a detriment. But I'm going to get nitpicky, but I will say that's how Shenmue needs to do it. The way that they treat the characters in the Final Fantasy Remake is how they should have treated Shenmue. Like, when you first meet Cloud in this game, it's a big moment. It's a really cool, like, he jumps off the train, just like in the original one, but he jumps off the train, does a cool move, a little flip, he lands like a superhero, he pops up and the camera zooms in on his face. It's Cloud. It's a cool moment. Everyone knows you're going to see Cloud. Everyone knows you're going to play as Cloud, but they still treat it with respect. They treat it with fandom, and they treat it like a special moment. Whereas you do Shenmue, and it's just like, okay, here's Ryo, he's there, here's the theme song in the options menu, and it's just not special at all. They don't have any, they're not aware of what fans are drawn to. And Final Fantasy is very aware of what the fans like. And they do a good job at sprinkling that stuff in the game. And I gotta say that the intro to this game is just incredible. I just had to wait for the longest siren to go by. It was the worst. Anyway, the whole intro is amazing. And again, they treat it with, they show some restraint. Like, the beginning opens, and there's a lot of new stuff in the intro. There's lots of, there's footage of this bird flying around and stuff, but just the way they get into things, they have the classic, they match the original so well, but in a cool way. And the moment that you hear the sound here coming up, you're going to hear it. I got it queued up. Like, those three notes are so iconic, and it's just, you're playing something special when, like, that just makes you smile. Like, hearing three notes of a song even though like I can't explain it, like even though I have no attachment to the actual game, I still was like super excited to go on this adventure. And like I said, I know the intro to the game pretty well, and like it's almost shot for shot. Like the camera pulls out. And the title Final Fantasy VII kicks in, and they do such a good job at not even really dancing between an homage. It's truly like a shot-for-shot redo of the original opening sequence, intercut with the train, Cloud jumps off, and then you're going. And I immediately, like I was playing through it, and even though it was just the part I had played in the demo already, both on the original and the new one, and I was playing on the real setting this time. I wasn't playing on classic. I just found, maybe I was just in a better mindset, or I don't know. I just really got into this game this time. It was so much more fun to me than the demo was. The combat was smoother. Like it felt like more of an action game rather than the turn-based stuff that I was used to. And I remember the classic mode when I was playing on the remake demo. There was a lot more menu stuff. Like it just seemed like I was giving instructions more than actually playing, like actually doing the fighting. And so I ended up finishing I played the game like nonstop for like 2 or 3 days. I finished it in like 2 or 3 days. It was just nonstop playing. I compared it to when I played Detroit. Because Detroit is such a heavy narrative game, and you're always progressing forwards through a story, it's almost like watching a movie where it's like, well, why stop? Like if you want to see what happens next, it's so hard to put down. And it was the same effect with this game. I was playing through the introduction, and I was like, man, I really want to see what happens next. I want to see where this story goes, and I could not stop playing it. And everything was fun. Like I just found the combat to be very easy to grasp at this time, and very fun, and you didn't spend a lot of time in the menus. You weren't assigning too much. You didn't even really have to ever do it like that much. If you're going to have to do some special moves and cast spells and stuff, but for the most part, if you were careful, you could kind of stay outside of the menus during combat. And even outside of combat, there wasn't a lot of traditional spending a billion hours setting things up, setting different equipping items and that kind of stuff. There wasn't a ton of that. There was just enough. It was the balance of that was really good. And the materia system is cool. Like if you're unfamiliar with it, you just have these balls of different power, and you can put them in different weapons and stuff. And each one has different abilities. Some give you, there's tons. They could give your characters the ability to heal themselves or charge up abilities or different spells and that kind of thing. And the more you use the same one, you level that one up, and it becomes more powerful. And it's just cool, the different combinations you can use and everything. But it's not, I think because it was my first RPG decades ago, it was a little bit over my head. This seems now it's like pretty much a standard in video games now, in RPGs especially. Even in like first-person games like Cyberpunk or Deus Ex, it's kind of the same. Like you have a skill tree and you can kind of pick which ones you want to do. And it's a little different, but overall it's pretty mainstay now. It didn't throw me for a loop. So I thought the gameplay itself was very accessible, very easy to understand, very fast, fun, and fluid. And it never felt overwhelming. It was the perfect amount of menus versus walking around versus story and watching and talking and all that kind of stuff. And ultimately, it really didn't feel like an RPG to me. And now, I haven't played an RPG in a very long time. As you heard my examples, those were all from like the Dreamcast days. I haven't really played a traditional, especially a Japanese RPG in forever. And so I'm not sure if this is how they've evolved over the years. Because if RPGs are like this now, I'm going to play them way more often, because this honestly did just feel, like I said, like Detroit. It was so story-centric. Tied in between all the in between all of the gameplay moments, it was very cinematic and very movie-ish, and it was just like watching an interactive story. And then the in-between parts, when you're not watching it, it's fun. Like you're just running around, you're hitting. It's like an action game almost. It was very cool. It was a really good mix, whatever this genre is now. I really liked it because I don't have the patience for slow turn-based, random encounters that just take over the screen. I really don't like random encounters. This game doesn't really have that. You see the enemies on screen, you can run up and fight them. They do spawn back pretty quickly, which I don't love. So if you're trying to explore an area, they do come back really fast, which can be annoying if you go down the wrong way. But overall, I really do like it, and I was so shocked to find myself I really got obsessed with it, and I was very surprised at how much I was liking the game, especially the early part, like the intro part, and then a little bit past the demo. I was really intrigued with it, and I liked where things were going. It's not perfect. Now there's almost I have two sides to the coin for this game. No pun intended, because I think that line is in the game actually. There are parts of this game that are like a 10 out of 10. Like, I really have no complaints, and I'm so blown away and so impressed. The gameplay's fun. The visuals are great. The game looks really great for the most part. The sound is great. The music is great. Like, everything is very solid. But then there's the other side of things where I think the game is really not so great. But it's again, it's kind of like the cyberpunk thing I talked about, where I feel like cyberpunk starts off, this is no spoilers for anyone who's worried about that, starts off on such a high note, and then for me it was kind of a constant ride downwards. It never really reached that height ever again, and I kind of feel similar with Final Fantasy VII, where I really loved the intro, and maybe it's because they were going so beat for beat with the original, and you could really tell, and it was really paced really well, and so I really liked the beginning, and then it kind of never really got back to that height. There are moments here and there that are cool, of course, but I never really felt as gripped as I was at the beginning. And there's a few reasons why. So the game is bizarrely linear, like Cyberpunk, but even more so. It's not an open world. But if you're used to playing RPGs, you're used to having an overworld, like a map to walk around in. You get to explore places at your will. This game is very linear, so you're always on a path. Like, there's not really an open area per se. There are little cities that have alleyways and little different places you can go, but it doesn't never really feel like you're in an open world. And I like that. I'm really glad that that's actually like that. I really want games to go back to this style of video games. The linear path, I really miss it, because it really just directs you down the proper path to experience and efficiently experience the game at its best. There's no, with an open world, there's the chance that you can almost play the game wrong. If you just happen to keep going into the most boring areas, or you explore the wrong area, there's a chance that you might experience the game that it's in a way that's not optimal. And I really miss just being told where to go at all times. And so I really liked that the game was linear and you were kind of always advancing forward, because, like I said, I was always experiencing new parts to the story, which then made it like a good book that I wanted to keep going through. But on the other side, the reason it's so linear is because it's episodic. So this game is not the full game. It's not the entirety of the story. It all takes place in Midgar, the first city of the game that you're in. And so they had to really stretch things out and really flesh characters out that are not big characters in the original game. They really add a lot more backstory and a lot more to it. I think. I don't know all these answers for sure, because of course I didn't play the first one, but I got that sense. So what happens when they're stretching stuff, when they're trying to stretch stuff out that you can tell was not long in the first game, you can really tell in this game. Even not having played the first one, I could tell. And what happened, one of the things that kind of drew me out of the game was that the environments in the game are very samey, and unfortunately they're environments that are usually always everyone's least favorite kind of environment in any other video game. So in any other video game, if you have to do like a factory level, usually people don't like the factory level. It's like, oh, I like the lava level, the ice level, but the factory level, no one wants to do the factory level. No one wants to go in sewers. Nobody wants to go in tunnels. And this game literally is all, like the entire game, you're in tunnels, you're in sewers, you're in factories, you're always on steel pipes, you're always in metal, like you're always, I just found the environments to be very unappealing. They're very bland and brown and steel and silver. And I get that that's like the city that you're in, but that's kind of the toss-up. That's kind of what they had to deal with. It's, if they wanted to get this game out sooner, they need to have less assets. They need to stretch things out. And that's one of the things they had to sacrifice, which is there's not going to be a ton of game here. It's going to be quite small. Now, that's not to say there's not beautiful parts to the game. There are some really nice looking areas. One of the kind of the cities you go to is more lively and kind of interesting, and where Aerith lives is kind of nice looking as well. Something that they did in the game that is also kind of weird is they have these 2D backgrounds like the original that kind of stretch over the entire background of the screen. So if you look up into the sky, you're looking at this flat 2D image, and at times it looks kind of cool, but there was this one moment. Overall, it's a little distracting because there's all this 3D stuff, and overall, it really does stand out. But there's this part near the end of the game where the 2D image is so ugly and low res. I would have sworn it's a mistake. Like, it looks like there's times when we for my game Billy Saves the World, when we import art incorrectly or not at the right resolution, it comes in really blurry and just low resolution. And there's like part in this game where the background is so bad, it is so low res, I could not believe that it was in the final game. Like, it had to be a mistake. And it's so close to the screen too. Like, it is so insanely bad. And I'm nitpicking that one. That's just one area of the game. The rest look passable. Sometimes they even look cool, but for the most part, I didn't love the 2D backgrounds. I get why they did it. It probably saved time and money, and also it is a little bit of an homage to the originals as well, as they could say that as an excuse. But overall, I did get a little bored of the environments. Not only do you keep going through the same kind of environments, but you do also literally go through the same environments. Like, sometimes you have to fight backwards. Like, there's a couple moments in the game where you have to revisit areas, and they're literally the same place that you've already been through. So they're kind of reusing areas, and it's not the end of the world, and you're not in them for too long. But you do get a sense of like, okay, I can really tell they're really stretching this game out. So that was one of my complaints, is that there were times where I was just getting really bored of the environments. But again, the intro, the first few hours of the game is done so well. Like, you're going through the factories at first and setting off the bomb, and then you're in the actual city. It's on fire. You're going through alleyways. I was very impressed. I actually couldn't believe what I was seeing from this game. And then you're in the city and you're going to Tifa's bar and stuff. And there's at the beginning of the game, like I said, there's a real high point where you're going through a lot of variety. Lots of story is happening. Lots of it is very interesting. But then after that chapter, and even like once you get to the city, that's when the game kind of shows its true face. And that's when you start getting these weird like side quests that are very, very clearly filler. You basically, because the game is linear, you have to complete all the side quests before you can leave a town. They don't allow you to go back to them because the game always progresses forwards. You can't go backwards. It's kind of hard to describe how they do it, but so the game often has these little hub areas where it'll just tell you like, okay, here's 7 side quests. You can do them all right now. But if you go further, like once you leave this city, because the story is going to continue, you can never go back and do the side quests. So it's up to you to decide like, okay, do I want to do these side quests? If you want to level your characters up or whatever, you're probably going to want to do that. The first time that happened, I actually did all of them. And, they're not the worst. Like, there is some funny little moments here and there. The funniest moment in the game to me happens in this side quest at the beginning where you have to find these cats. And up until then, I wasn't really liking Cloud. I found him to be angsty and a little bit too cool. Like he had that too cool attitude, but he was almost to the point where it was annoying to me as a player. I didn't really like him. I didn't like Barrett either. He was very over the top. I'll get to that later though. But there's a moment where you rescue these cats and Cloud goes, I don't know why. Like I don't know if this is a translation thing or what the deal was, but there's a part where you simply pet a cat, and Cloud's like, ugh, this sucks. Like it makes almost no sense, but it made me laugh that just his attitude towards petting a cat was so negative. But he slowly won me over. He does get a little bit less like too cool, and just he does get more cool, like just legitimately cool, and you learn a little bit more about him, and he did win me over. The relationship between him and Barrett, I thought was the worst in the game, just because Barrett was so incredibly inconsistent character-wise. I get what they were going for with his character archetype. He's very he's a kind of a stereotypic character, but the problem is those kind of characters, they have tension at the beginning with the main player typically, or if it's a movie, it's the main character. So they have friction at the beginning, and then they take shots at each other, and slowly over the course of the movie or the game or the story, that turns into kind of playful ribbing, and then they have an understanding that they like each other, and near the end they actually become friends, that kind of thing. This game was trying to do that, and it does do that, but they kept reverting back to old Barrett very erratically. So like even parts in the very end of the game, he would just suddenly become extremely rude and very angry at Cloud, even though they've already passed that point in their relationship. So I didn't really connect with Barrett and Cloud in this game as in terms of their dynamic. It reminded me again of Detroit, where like if you make certain choices, there's a cop and an old cop storyline in Detroit, and at times it seems like you're making headway with him and you're kind of befriending him, but then he'll just snap back and like you're just enemies all of a sudden, and it just didn't really line up correctly. So I thought Barrett and Cloud were very similar to that, where their back and forth just seemed all over the place at all times, and I could never really get a sense of where they were at in reality. Other story issues that I had were that I was always trying to get a sense of where the story was going, because I like I said, I know the main spoilers of this game. I know the main story beats of what happened, but I don't know any of the details. And there was a lot of times where I was trying to figure out, like, I wonder if this is in the original game, or if they are sprinkling this in sooner than it happens because they need to pace it differently, or they want to make it better. And so there were times where I was like, I wonder why that's there, or what that's about. And it goes as early as like the very beginning of the game, like Cloud's having these kind of nightmare PTSD type hallucinations, and I think I do remember him having those early in the game, but I don't recall, for some reason, I don't recall Sephiroth ever being in the game so early, and this game introduces him like very soon. Like, I was almost under the impression that I wouldn't even meet Sephiroth in this entire game. I thought he was more introduced later, like much later on, but he gets introduced very immediately through a hallucination, and that's kind of where he stays, and that's one of my problems with that. I have a lot of issues with the story, to be honest. I overall, that was one of the aspects where I felt they dropped the ball I wasn't, like, for a game that gets touted for its storyline, I didn't really find the story to be that great. It was kind of meh. It starts off cool, but then I was like, okay, it's kind of going nowhere now, and now it's kind of gets distracted for a bit, and then it just doesn't really go anywhere. There's some cool ideas. I like that there's like I like the government political like the terrorist organization, or I can't talk, the terrorist like Avalanche organization and Shinra, and I like that aspect, because that's not something that's typically done in video games that often, like weird boardroom just political government stuff, and I found that setting to be kind of interesting, and I liked how one of my favorite story points was near the beginning, when the bomb that you set off doesn't quite work, and they actually, the corporation actually sets it off themselves to make you look bad, so it destroys way more of what you were planning to. and they kind of set you guys up, and then that kind of happens again. And I don't know, it just didn't really, like, after that point, it didn't really seem to go like, not much actually seemed to actually occur. Like, if I were to write out main story points, I would feel like I would have 2 or 3 really cool ones at the very beginning, like the first couple hours, but then everything after that is kind of just filler or just like background information for characters. And I imagine that if you were a fan of the original one, you would like this a lot more, because it's kind of like watching the extended editions of Lord of the Rings, but for people who've already seen the theatrical versions, they're getting more out of something they already like. But for someone who just starts with the extended editions, that might be a bit much, and it's not even a proper comparison, because it's so much more. It would almost be like having to watch the extended editions plus like a 12-episode story TV show of just Aragorn's backstory. So there's like, it goes really in depth on certain characters, and they really flesh out every character, which I think a lot of people will appreciate, and they'll be like, oh, that's so cool that they're adding so much to the world. But for someone who's just going into it at the first time, it almost seems like it does come off as filler. It comes off like, why are we spending so much time with this character who I know in the original game is not that big of a deal, and it's not actually progressing the overall story that much. It's just progressing tiny kind of pointless details. It does build relationships sometimes. Like, it's not all a waste. I really liked the relationship between. I'm really jumping all over the place here. I like those 3 characters that you meet with Barrett, Jesse, Biggs, and what's his name? Wedge. He's voiced by Matt Jones, Badger from Breaking Bad, who I met in real life, actually, at a bar, and then proceeded to get punched in the face by Kate Upton. So those 3 characters, I believe I've heard fans say that they're almost nothing in the original game, but I actually really liked them in this game. It added like, anytime you were out with that crew, it made the stakes higher. It made them more interesting. They had good dynamics. There is the funny one. There's kind of like the flirtation. I liked Jesse a lot. There was like a nice little flirtatious storyline with Cloud and Jesse. And then the other guy is cool too. Like, they had enough of a personality that you care about them at the end. And I don't know what happens to them in the end in the original game, but they, spoiler alert, they pretty much all die. Actually, no, that's not true. Only Jesse does, which sucks. But I want to go back, because I'm almost going into another story point that I think is bad, but I want to go back to Sephiroth. So you're seeing Sephiroth really early, and you're seeing these flashes throughout the whole game that get stronger and stronger, to the point where it's like he's almost manifesting in real life. He's actually there. He's no longer a ghost. He's no longer a vision. He's actually there. And I was very surprised at the fact that that's how he kind of is the entire game. And they kind of expect you to, the way that everyone else around views him seems to be with such reverence and such fear or hatred, especially Cloud. He seems really against this guy, but I had no personal connection to Sephiroth. I had no context to why. Like, they didn't really. He remains a mystery kind of the whole game, and I never got on the same level as Cloud, where I was like, okay, like Cloud seems to be overdoing it for how little this guy seems to be in the game. Of all the villains in the game, he has the least to do with any of the problems that take place in this game, and he's the most mysterious, yet he's seen as the most hated villain. And so I was always like, no, I kind of like, even this random guy on a motorcycle, I hate more, because he's actually affecting my real life. Like, he's actually affecting the actual gameplay and like the Turks and every villain. There's so many villains in this game, actually. So that's also a weird thing, but they fleshed them out just enough that that I didn't mind it, even though there's like seemingly like 12 different main villains in this game. So I didn't really connect with Sephiroth, which seems to be kind of a problem, since he's such a big character in the franchise, and I'm assuming hopefully that changes in the future episodes, that'll become more explained, and maybe I will get on that emotional. I'll get on Cloud's level with that, which does bring me to the other kind of the same problem, which is I know everyone loves Aerith in this game, and especially what happens to her. There's a huge emotional connection with the player and loss and that kind of stuff. But I personally thought that she was the worst done female character in the main cast. I thought that Jessie was awesome. She was my favorite girl in of the three. They just have such a fun little, it's very minor, but it's a fun little flirtatious thing that her and Cloud have. And then you meet Tifa, and her backstory gets fleshed out. And I found Tifa, so I thought Jessie was the most fun, but Tifa was the most interesting one. There seemed to be she had the most depth to her. They have a whole history together. They were kids, and there seemed to be more there. Though I was a little confused with who Tifa was in context to Barrett, and I even Googled it at one point because I was like, did I miss something? And it turns out that people were also confused even in the original game, because I actually thought that Barrett and Tifa were married, or they were a couple or something. And Barrett even has a kid that looks exactly like Tifa, and so I was like, is that their kid together? But apparently they're not. Apparently they have no relation to each other whatsoever. They just really give off a weird coupley vibe. I don't know what the deal is with that. But I did find, there was some kind of friction there, and there was something between her and Cloud. I don't know what it is, but I did find it interesting. I liked their dynamic. And then you meet Aerith, who comes off right away as super annoying. Her voice is even annoying. She's extremely clingy to, like, not in a charming, cute way, but in a very annoying way. And I couldn't help but just like, I know a girl in real life like each girl. Like, I know a girl that's like Jessie. I know girls that are like Tifa. I know girls that are like Aerith. And Aerith is the type of girl that I would never want to have around me. And she just was so annoying the whole time and would never leave you alone. I didn't find their banter to be charming. It legitimately just came off as annoying to me. And I did warm up to her later on. Once you find out more about the fact that she's the last ancient, she did get a little bit more interesting. But personally, I liked the other two girl characters more, and I found that troubling. And I'm curious if other people who've played the game, the original and this one, feel the same way, or if they feel like they dropped the ball on that, because I know a lot of people are so attached to Aerith, and I know that Jessie is barely a character in the first game, and so I'm curious if people just by default really gravitated towards Aerith and found that really intriguing, because for me, I didn't really like their dynamic at all, for the most part. And another thing that almost ruined Aerith for me as well is that, and this goes back to something I said at the very beginning of this discussion, which was, I said they almost overdid their fan service and their fandom when I was using the Shenmue comparison. And to me, like, overall, I'm not going to complain about it, but there is almost an overwhelming use of theme songs. It's to the point where I was like, okay, I get it, guys. Like, I get that this is a big scene. And a lot of times with Aerith, they were like really almost hitting you over the head with like, see, this is Aerith. That's Aerith's theme. This is it. You got to feel emotional. And I'm just curious if those theme songs came that early in this game. Like, it almost seemed like the game was self-aware of itself and it was really trying, like, hey, remember this? But if you're a first-time player, you shouldn't be remembering that stuff yet. It shouldn't be emotional yet. And so it sometimes seemed a bit overused, and I felt like that almost took the rug out from Aerith yet again, because they really overuse a lot of like themes with her, and they really beat you over the head with the fan service stuff with her and a lot of different characters. But overall, I'm not going to complain too much because I love the music. Even when like you're running through the streets and like the fight song comes on, it has one of the best fighting songs ever. And like Cloud takes a sword out and you run up to an enemy and hit the enemies. It's really awesome. Overall, the music's great. But back to the story. For the most part, I was following it fine. It seemed pretty simple overall. There was something that I thought of, and again, this is me nitpicking again, but there was something that I was thinking about while playing it. And I think it's an interesting topic that I would love to hear some professional takes on this. But at what point do we start holding up the same standards for all games? And what I mean by that is when you have something like The Last of Us, where the standard, like the characters and the animations are so good and the acting is so good and it feels like you're legitimately watching and listening to a real movie in comparison to, say, a JRPG where it's, I know people find the cheesiness and they find that endearing, and almost part of the enjoyment is how bad it can be at times. And it's not that this game is atrocious, but I am curious. Like, when I'm watching the game, I'm like, okay, they spent so much time on the graphics in this game, and they do such a good job at trying to make things realistic and real, to have the relationships and the drama to come across like an actual movie. But then the voice work is delivered really stale or just classic kind of cheesy Japanese dubbing kind of stuff. Like, I didn't love the voice acting in the game, and like the quality of the interactions are passable. Like, it's something that you would only it just reminds me of, the 90s and the early 2000s. Like, just, it reminds me that you're playing a video game. It didn't really get me. It doesn't take me to the same place that Last of Us does. And I'm just curious, at what point do we start holding up all games to that standard? Because if you really do that with movies, if you saw a movie, like if you compare two blockbusters, like in the summer, if Fast and the Furious comes out with a new movie and the Transformers comes out with a new movie, and one of them has just horrific CG and like it looks like a stop motion, and then the other one has just photorealistic CG, you would say that one of them is trash. You wouldn't say like, oh, but it's kind of endearing, it's fine for that movie. We kind of hold all movies and all entertainment things to a certain standard, and I feel like video games is rare in the fact that we kind of give certain genres or certain developers a pass at the quality of what they put out. Like, I would love to have seen what this would feel like if the characters behaved like real people and the animations were like real people, and the graphics and the visuals were a lot more realistic and like The Last of Us. Like, it'd be really cool to see what Naughty Dog could do with a Final Fantasy if they just somehow were hired to do that part of it. Again, it's not terrible. It's just a completely different league. It's a different thing, and I can't help but compare them now that we've gotten it, and now that a lot of games are getting to that point where they're going for the more realistic approach. I couldn't help but compare the two, and coming off of playing a lot of those kind of games like Cyberpunk and Last of Us, I think my brain was just thrown for a loop when I was back to, oh yeah, I'm playing just regular video games now. Because there's like certain sentences and certain points where things just don't make any sense. Like, there's just the certain reactions that would happen in real life. Like, if something just exploded and fell and almost killed us, the characters behave in such a bizarre way in Final Fantasy, but it's almost what you would expect. Like, it's what you'd expect for a Final Fantasy JRPG type game, but it's not what you'd expect in real life or what you would expect from Naughty Dog or something like that. So I don't know. It's just something I was thinking about, and I'm curious if that ever hampers anyone else's play experience. But anyway, I did find a part. I don't know when exactly it happened, but I did eventually hit a part where I was just like, I am kind of not forcing my way through, but I was no longer as excited to get to the next story beat because I could sense that it was going nowhere or wasn't going anywhere that interesting yet. And so I was really more so, instead of playing for I want to see the next scene, I was saying I just want to play so I can see the ending, because I just want to kind of get this over with. The story sort of just dies down, really deviates. There's a town where you dress up like a woman and stuff. It doesn't really have anything to do with anything. It's just, and I actually liked that part. It was actually kind of funny. That bad guy was probably my favorite character in the game, the Corneo, Don Corneo. I thought his acting was easily the best of anyone in the game, and his animation was better than anyone. Like, he was such a good character. He was really interesting and very odd. I liked that villain. And I also really liked, in terms of acting, Aerith's mom. There's a scene. It's actually maybe one of my favorite scenes in the game. I usually hate flashbacks, but there's a good flashback involving and explaining Aerith as a small girl and how she meets her mom, and then how her mom lost her husband to the war, but she isn't sure yet if he actually was killed or not. But then Aerith actually senses it and tells her new mom that he's gone, he's dead. And then she gets the letter in the mail a couple days later that he is indeed killed in action. So that's when she realizes that this girl that she's kind of adopted is special. But I really liked that scene, and I thought her mom's acting was really good. And the whole scene was actually cool. And that was one of the moments where I actually liked Aerith, and I thought she became more of an interesting character to me. The only things that stood out to me story-wise that I was kind of confused about was all those weird floating death cloak things. I don't recall those ever in the original game. I'm sure they're there. They seem to be a really big part of this game. At times, it almost seemed like the game, like I was almost going to text my brother and ask him, like, is this game actually secretly not a reboot? It's like, sometimes it felt like the game was aware of itself, even to the story parts. Like, it almost seemed like sometimes Sephiroth was referencing the first game in a way, or like I just got weird feelings sometimes, and I was like, okay, I must not be understanding this bit here yet, or it'll be revealed to me, because sometimes it just seemed like there was obviously more going on than they were revealing, but it almost seemed like they were talking about the past or like the first game somehow. And then, of course, near the end, and my brother did tell me he wanted to find out how I responded to the end of the game, because he said there's a part near the end that I just flat out would be confused by. I'm pretty sure I know what he's talking about. There's these flashes to like another time. I'm not sure what they are, but it shows this character. I think they say Zack, but he looks just like Cloud. Kind of. He has Cloud's sword. He has black hair, and they flash randomly to this character, and they don't explain it at all. It didn't necessarily confuse me. I knew probably that's what he was talking about when I was watching it, but it didn't stand out to me. It just seemed like, oh, okay, this is clearly something that they're setting up that I will find out eventually. So it didn't like ruin anything for me. It kind of just felt like, here's some breadcrumbs to look forward to. To me, I don't know what that was. My guess is that it's like a look at the like maybe an alternate future or like an alternate path or something that could happen. I know those flying death things are in the game because they're trying to control what happens, and they're trying to make sure what happens does happen. So maybe that's a glimpse into like an alternate future. What if things don't happen a certain way or something like that? I don't know. But it didn't ruin it to me. I didn't get overly confused by it. It just seemed it seemed a little maybe abrupt at worst. I found it to be more confused, honestly, not confused, but I found more thrown off overall by Sephiroth. Like I said before, I found his appearance in this game just to be very pointless. I don't understand why he was there. Maybe I missed something, but I feel like they were keeping him a mystery for the whole game, I think, and they don't really explain why he's there, who he is. From what I gather, he's a famous soldier, and I didn't get the impression he was good or bad. He just says he's a famous soldier, and I think there's a line where Cloud says he kills him or something, but then I was like, was that the first game? Are they referencing the first game somehow? I don't know. I did get lost as to how or why Sephiroth fit into this game. I had really no idea why he was such a huge name, and that's what kind of broke it for me, where I was like, is he a big name right now because like is this game making him a bigger deal because the developers forgot that some people haven't played the whole game, or I don't know, it just seemed a bit sudden and weird. And he does end up becoming the ultimate boss in the game. And for me, I was just like, I don't know why I'm even really killing this guy. I don't know what he's doing. I don't really know his motivations or what, I don't really know a ton of what he's trying to accomplish. And if it was explained in the game, I totally missed it, and they did not do a good enough job explaining that, because I do know all the motivations for every other character, like the 12 other bad guys in the game. Like, there's so many of them. The what's his name, Rude and Rufus and Seng and Shinra present. Like, they all seem to have very, even if they're only in the game for like 10 seconds, they somehow get across why they're a villain very clearly and their motivations. But with Sephiroth, he just seemed like a complete mystery, and the mystery was fine if he had stayed a mystery. But the fact that they suddenly make him the main villain, and the characters are reacting so powerfully towards him, and Cloud's like, I hate you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't hate Sephiroth because he hasn't done anything, and they haven't explained who he is yet. And that was one of the surprising things. I was not at all expecting to hear the One-Winged Angel theme. I thought that happened at the very end of the game. Like, I didn't think we would be fighting Sephiroth in this game even at all. But the whole like Jehovah thing, like I really thought that was all I thought that all took place in I thought that was the final fight of the whole game, but yeah, it happens in this game. And so that was a huge shocker to me. I was very surprised how much Sephiroth was in this game. I really thought they could have just not had him in this whole first chapter and just had him do something crazy in the second one. That's what I was expecting, at least. I really didn't think we would see him. If I were to have put money on things, I thought what would happen is that you would meet Sephiroth at the end and he would do something. I know there's that famous shot of him walking into the fire, and I thought that would be his first introduction in the game, but it would happen at the end. Like, you would meet him and he would do something crazy and then walk into the fire, and that would kind of set up the sequel. But that didn't happen at all. He's just in the game. And didn't love the final fight. I really didn't like the whole ending, like the gameplay of the ending. You have to fight so many bosses at the end that it was kind of ridiculous. It was it was almost like you had to fight every single enemy in the game, and every boss in the game except for the house again. But so there was almost too much fighting near the end. I didn't like the motorcycle part that much. I found that guy kind of annoying because I found this glitch in that section that was really annoying. But I eventually beat him. And but yeah, too much fighting. And at that point, I'd kind of given up on the story. Like, I was just like, there's nothing really happening that really intrigues me. And it was sad to say because I was so hyped on the game. Like, there was a point where I was like, I'm obsessed. This game's a 10. And by the end of it, I still enjoyed it. And I'm still thinking about it. And I think very positively about it. And I even replayed the intro again on Twitch the other day. But I kind of feel like it's a 7 out of 10-ish for me. Just because the storyline, I almost wish I could have played the whole game. I wish I could play the original game with this game's gameplay and graphics, because I feel like the meandering that the fans are going to enjoy because they're getting more detail out of a story they like already comes off as filler for people who haven't played the first game. And so it would have been cool if I could just play the entire storyline and just rush through the main storyline and leave all these side quests. Like, this feels like a game that, like, a lot of this game feels like it should be skippable, but they kind of force you to go down these meandering paths. And so it kind of takes away from the actual story that people say is so great. And for me, at least, it does seem a little thin. It seemed like not that much actually happens. Like, if you had no idea, that's what I was thinking about while playing it. I was like, if I had no idea what this game was, I had no idea of its significance. I just picked it up off a shelf, a brand new person, and was like, oh, I'm going to try this game out called Final Fantasy VII Remake. Like, if I just went into it, I would think that this game has maybe the worst story of all time, because like nothing really happens. Like, nothing significant really happens if you think about it in terms of that. If you think about it in terms of someone who doesn't know anything about the game, just describing only the events that happen in just this game, it's not that great, and it's not that big. It's not that there's not much adventure. Nothing really occurs other than very minor story beats. It's not very grand. And so I thought that was kind of a problem as well. I have the benefit of knowing that it's significant, so I'm giving it a pass on that because I know that there's still a lot more story to come. So I'm not going to be too hard on that aspect, but it is a video game, and if I am talking about just this game, the story does kind of fall a little flat. The gameplay was pretty good. For the most part, it holds up. I found the enemies got a little boring after a while. You fight a lot of like rats and like mosquito type characters that are usually just like the beginner enemy in a game. So I did get tired of the enemies and I got tired of the environment. So there are things that I didn't like about it that did hurt my enjoyment overall, which is why I kind of think it's more of a 7, maybe an 8. And that's why I think it's kind of similar to Cyberpunk in that regard, where it starts off very high, but then it doesn't really achieve that high ever again. So I could talk forever, even longer about this game. I should have wrote things down because while playing it, I had tons of questions and things I was wondering the whole time and just thoughts on it. But I did enjoy it. I would think I think the most disappointing thing is that the way that it ended, I'm not dying to play another one. That's probably the most disappointing part. Like, I'm not eagerly waiting for the next release. If it were to come out this year or next year, I would not be playing it anytime soon. So I kind of hope it does take them forever to make it. And I personally wish that they would just, like, I'd be cool with them waiting 6 years and just finishing the whole game. Like, just make the second half the rest of the game if possible, because I just want to see what happens. And I want the story to be efficiently told so that it's good, and you're not forced to go through things that you don't maybe I don't want to see the entire backstory of the janitor of the bathroom. It's just like, I don't care about every character, and since that didn't happen in the original. Hey, thank you very much for listening to this clip from my audio blog. If you've enjoyed that and want access to the full episode, head over to patreon.com/CooperBebo. I'm an actor, writer, and producer of film, television, and video games, and as such, I like to talk about all of those things as well. I post new episodes every week where I talk about anything and everything that I feel like, as well as updates on my projects I'm working on. It's a lot of fun. Would love to see you over there. If you know of any games I should play or something I should watch, just head over there and let me know. Thanks again.